When Byron came to Rome approximately 1700 years later, the Colosseum lay in ruins. Almost all the marble facing had been removed in the intervening centuries. Imperial Rome had been sacked by successive waves of barbarian warrior tribes from the 5th to the 7th centuries AD. When the city's aqueducts were cut in the 7th century, it spelt the end of Rome as a metropolitan centre. It was no longer able to sustain its population, which shrank from about 1.5 million under the emperors to around 50,000 by the 10th century AD. During the Renaissance period, the 15th and early 16th centuries, Rome had reasserted itself as a Christian Catholic capital ruled over by the papacy. It was the papacy which had authorized much of the plundering of the Colosseum for its marble, burnt to release limestone which was used for cement. The symbolism of using a site where Christians had been martyred was not lost. Neither was the convenience of a ready-made source of building materials in the centre of the city. By the 18th century, the remains of the Colosseum, still humblingly massive despite the ravages of time and pillaging, were overgrown. Vines and brambles and pine trees grew among the broken fragments of rock, collapsed arches and vaults. Nearby, shepherds grazed their flocks on the wasteland beneath which lay the ruins of the Forum. Byron's friend and fellow poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, like him an exile in Italy, described the place in a letter written in 1816, 2 years before Byron himself came to Rome. It has been changed by time into the image of an amphitheatre of rocky hills, overgrown by the wild olive, the myrtle, and the fig tree, threaded by little paths which wind among its ruined stairs and immeasurable galleries. The copsewood overshadows you as you wander through its labyrinths, and the wild weeds of this climate of flowers bloom under your feet. I can scarcely believe that when encrusted with Dorian marble and ornamented by columns of Egyptian granite, its effect could have been so sublime and so impressive. Byron had left England in 1817, ostracised by the society which had celebrated, even worshipped him since the publication of his poem, Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, 5 years earlier. Then, in 1812, Byron had returned from a 2-year voyage around Portugal, Spain, Turkey, Greece and Albania. Other European countries, especially Italy, were closed to English travellers since their occupation by Napoleon's armies. Once back in England, Byron had published Childe Harold, which is a loosely biographical, poetic account of his travels, figuring the young, decadent, cynical and dissolute person of Childe Harold, an anti-hero clearly modelled on Byron himself. The first edition of the poem sold out almost overnight. Byron's publisher, John Murray, reprinted. Thousands of copies were sold, lent, borrowed, breathlessly read by a public who discovered that they loved to be shocked. The poem's success, due largely to its scandalous nature, catapulted Byron into celebrity over the next few years. By 1817, a series of notorious affairs, mounting debts, rumours of incest with his half-sister, and sodomy, then a capital offence, with his wife, poisoned the glittering reputation he had won for himself. At a party given at Holland House in London, when Byron entered the ballroom, every female guest got up and left. Selling his ancestral home to pay off creditors and gather funds, Byron set off for the continent, now open to English travellers after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815. Initially basing himself in Venice, Byron travelled to Rome for a brief visit in 1818. The 3 weeks or so he spent there provided him with material for an additional chapter or canto to Childe Harold. The manuscript was sent back to London to John Murray. The first edition of 3,000 sold out immediately. Canto 4 of Childe Harold describes Harold's or Byron's reaction to the vast array of classical ruins in Rome, the Colosseum included. Byron is one of the best guides to ancient Rome, partly because he had been classically educated at Harrow and briefly at Cambridge, and the sites and the monuments were already familiar to him as the settings for all that he had read since a boy, but mainly because he was able to use his learning to enter imaginatively into what he was looking at. Thus in the Colosseum he imagines what it must have been like to die out in the middle of the arena, in the heat, surrounded by the roar of the bloodthirsty crowd. Byron seems to have used a famous classical statue of a dying gladiator, now in the Capitoline Museum nearby, as the model for his own imaginary doomed combatant. I see before me the gladiator lie. He leans upon his hand, his manly brow consents to death but conquers agony, and his drooped head sinks gradually low, and through his side the last drops, ebbing slow from the red gash, fall heavy, one by one, like the first of a thunder shower. And now the arena swims around him. He is gone, ere ceased the inhuman shout which hailed the wretch who won. At other points in the poem, such as his commitment to stepping backwards in time to inhabit Rome's classical past, Byron returns to the sites by night, as if Rome's classical ghosts only truly walk after sundown. Hence the contrast Byron draws between visiting the Colosseum by day and by night. The reference to the bald first Caesar is to Julius Caesar. Byron likens his imperial crown, the wreath of laurel, to the trees growing out of the top of the walls. But when the rising moon begins to climb its topmost arch, and gently pauses there, when the stars twinkle through the loops of time, and the low night breeze waves along the air the garland forest which the grey walls wear, like laurels on the bald first Caesar's head, when the light shines serene but doth not glare, then in this magic circle raise the dead. Heroes have trod this spot, 'tis on their dust ye tread.